Okay, next on the agenda is item 14.2, ordinance regarding proposed amendment to the DuPont Municipal Code Title 25 on the new complete community overlay regulations at Patriots Landing. And I think I want to answer a question that was brought up during the public hearing. This overlay only affects the Patriots Landing area. It's very narrowly constructed, written specifically for that. Confirm that for me.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, the way the language is written is that it can only be applied to areas within the city where the comprehensive plan allows it. And currently, the only comprehensive plan, the only element in the comprehensive plan that allowed it is the Yehle Village neighborhood. It's not applicable to any other portion of the city at this point.
So somebody can't come and throw up a apartment complex in the historic village because this
they cannot use this language to do that there.
And we've seen that at the state level where there's been laws written that could only apply to the city of DuPont. And that's a common thing to do. I can see how that mistake was made, but I wanted to clarify that for the public that this doesn't apply to anywhere else. It applies there.
That is correct.
Okay. I turn it over to you now.
At this point, we'll just do a brief refresher and then open it up for your questions. And this was, again, it's an element of the plan that was the development regulations that were crafted to implement the amendments to the comprehensive plan that was passed by the council in November of last year. This creates a complete community overlay. What that is, it's an overlay zoning designation. One of the criteria is it can only be applied to those areas of the city where it's expressly permitted in the comprehensive plan. And currently, our comprehensive plan only addresses it within the Yehle Village neighborhood, no other portion of the city. In a very summary sort of way, it provides for the multifamily. There are some provisions in there for, again, affordable housing units or senior housing units, which is an add-on into that area that can, an applicant propose to do that and create additional density for senior-only units. It creates opportunity for basically kind of a mixed-use sort of a vibe. It allows for some small-scale retail activities, street-front activities out towards McNeil, allows for some office activities. Really, they're supportive of that entire area, of the Patriots Landing area, is really to be able to help this be a kind of a self-contained sort of community as a way to allow the residents there to be able to walk and take advantage of these opportunities and uses within their neighborhood rather than having to drive outside of the neighborhood to go to some basic things. It's designed as a pedestrian-oriented activity. So with that, Mr. Givens and I are available if you have any questions.
Council, open to your questions and comments. Councilmember Barnes.
This overlay is only available to use in neighborhoods where the comprehensive plan specifically allows it.
That is correct.
What is it in the comprehensive plan that allows it? Is it just wording that says this neighborhood can be utilized with this overlay?
There's a provision under the Yehle Park Village neighborhood, and it was one of the some new text that was added at the beginning part of it, and the basically last sentence, I want to make sure I read it correctly because I didn't bring the comp plan in front of me, as an incentive to provide additional senior housing and mixed-use village center, the City of DuPont Land Use Code may provide for density bonuses in limited mixed-use options within the residential districts for this type of urban form. And that's only within the Yehle Village neighborhood. And then it relates back to, it provides this process that we have for a kind of a master planning process that was created as a way to implement this particular language for that neighborhood, or for any development activity within that neighborhood.
Okay, and so my understanding is that this overlay is only for use in properties that are 10 acres or more, correct?
That's correct. There was a minimum size limitation in order to provide the complete community overlay.
And so this is kind of off the cuff, so I apologize. My intent is to kind of protect the historic village and make sure that people won't be able to use this there. Can you speak for what that looks like in the historic village? Would that property consisting of the apartments up towards the front of the historic village, would that be 10 acres? Would it be, I know my property back there is about 1/5 of an acre, so it's going to be a whole lot of houses would have to get torn down in order to do it.
Well, there are two actions that would have to take place. One is there would need to be an amendment to the comprehensive plan that may, if we're talking about a historic village, there would need to be an amendment to the comprehensive plan that would make an affirmative statement that this area would be eligible for the application of the CCO overlay.
Sure.
And barring that, no development can come in and utilize that as an ability to do it. So first, we'd have to amend the comprehensive plan, which can only be approved by the council. We only do that once a year, and there are no proposals to amend the plan in that way. So speculation about how that might be applied in the future, I can't really speculate.
Well,
and it's
not
permitted.
necessarily how it would be applied, just a size comparison kind of thing. And if you don't feel comfortable answering that, like I said, that was an off-the-cuff question.
Yeah, I mean,
Fair
I haven't evaluated the size of parcels out there to know if there's an existing 10-acre parcel on its own, but any short of that, it would be a consolidation of a lot of other properties in order to A, do that, and
Right.
B, it'd have to be an amendment to the comp plan as well.
Sure, okay.
Councilmember Coffey.
Yes. Jeff or Ryan, can you refresh the memory in the public of what is the size of this Patriots Landing parcel?
44. The remainder portion is about 44 acres, that's correct.
Okay, so a 10-acre parcel would be like the very front strip, maybe along this McNeil from east to west?
Yes, that's the entire, including the existing building. Yeah, so the existing I mean, just wanted to confirm with Mr. Gibbons, the entire Patriots Landing holding, including the existing facilities, is about 44. That property, if I recall, on that side is roughly about 20 acres
Right.
of the undeveloped portion in that area, correct?
So it'd basically be probably what's visible from McNeil on that's the empty parcel.
Yeah, it'd be about half that size of the property, almost probably if you were to follow the road all the way back to where it wraps around the end of the cul-de-sac, that would be, roughly half the depth of that property.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Councilmember Gassick.
Thank you. Could you show us a satellite view of that area and its proximity to the residential area?
You talking about
Since they have
Patriots Landing?
control of
Yes,
the,
Patriots Landing and then the residential areas surrounding it. I'd like to see that area that we're talking about, what that would look like with the height of the buildings proposed and how close the proximity is to the homes in that area.
So the county literally changed this last week, and we're just trying to learn the new interface. Sorry, give me 1 second.
Okay.
I'm trying to do it with the property line so we can get a good view.
I'm sorry, I should have given you advance notice.
It's all right,
sorry.
just take a second.
as our city administrator said, they just changed the layout of that entire page, and I just found that out today when I was trying to look something
did
up.
they?
So finding how to navigate through it now, we're learning as we go at this moment, because
There we go.
it just happened.
So the 75 feet in height that's proposed for the multifamily structure,
Yeah, it's right in that area.
It's gonna be back here, right,
That's
Jeff?
Yes.
very back against
Jeff,
GLM
where
property.
the cursor's moving, it's gonna be back
Which
in
is
here.
also
That is, they haven't submitted a plan, but their discussions that they've had with us and their concept is to put the multifamily towards the back of the property next to the golf course area.
Is that where you have the mouse right now?
If you see where they're,
Yeah.
yeah,
Let me move it so you can see it.
See the cursor?
in that southern, yeah.
Okay. And the 75 feet in height, is that 5 stories?
It's a hard one to answer, and Mr. Danick will always correct me. I'm very technical when I look at this. I never talk in terms of stories because stories vary depending on what you build.
Sure.
So 75 feet is 75 feet. Roughly, if you're looking at 12-foot floor to ceiling or a little bit more, probably about 15 feet by the time you put all the interstitial space in there, yeah, you may be talking about 5 stories.
Could you zoom out a little bit for me, please?
And Councilmember Barnes, when we're
That's all. I
further,
have.
keep going? Okay.
I'm
Would you
good.
like to see the entrance? You were talking about the apartments?
I would love.
Sure, all right, I'm gonna get you over there.
And Councilmember Gassick, one of the things that, we have developed the regulations that basically create, the lack of a best way to explain it, like a wedding cake effect, where the closer you are to the property line, the lower the height limit is, so you have to be further away from the property line in order to step up to achieve those maximum heights. And that was a lot of discussion with the Planning Commission for the very purpose of making sure there were no, buildings weren't overtaking the surrounding, the adjoining property lines.
Yeah, Matt's next. Then you.
It's 2.4 acres. The apartments are 2.4 acres.
Okay, Councilmember Heather.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I understand that their plan is not necessarily to build in the forward, if you will, part of the property towards McNeil, but by enacting this in code, they would be able to do that, correct? Not just in that back.
Well, the code would depend on which area of the parcel they applied for the CCO, the complete community overlay, but I'm going to presume they may apply for it all at once. It has to go through a master planning process, and it has to go through public hearing processes in order to review and evaluate any potential impacts that it might have in their design. They haven't submitted anything at this point in time, so I only know by what they have hinted at what they would like to do with the property, that their intent would be to build the residential toward the back portion of the property and create some of the other amenities out towards the front portion of the property. But it is designed in such a way that any structures have to be, the taller they are, have to be set back further away from the property line, no matter what that activity might be, in order to keep it in scale with the surrounding properties.
Okay, and you answered, so how many stories? But now, 300 units, or you didn't really answer that, that's because you really can't, that's fine. Where was I? Oh, so 300 units per single building. Any idea how many 300-unit buildings would fit in this particular? I mean, it's very dependent, but I mean, you have an idea of what size of building it takes and
There's
the amount of
there's
land you have
not
to
enough
play with.
density for that, because we have to calculate the overall density for all of the property based on number of units that presently exist within the existing cottage units that surround the property. We look at the entirety of the property to figure out the maximum density, and so there's not more than my recollection, and Mr. Gibbons, if you can.
I think it's less than 300.
Yeah, it's less than 300 total that they would be developing on the property, period.
Less than 300 units?
Yes.
Okay. Then any reason in particular we have 300 units as a max in the draft?
That was, I think, a proposal that they initially kind of had submitted. It's kind of a cap, but they still have to be able to do the math to get whatever the unit count is. It's not a given. That's just kind of the cap that was provided in that particular, in the draft that we went through and the discussions that we had. But it's always going to be dependent on the size of the property in terms of how we calculate the unit count and based on the configuration. Again, two things. While it doesn't apply any other part of the city, the CCO is in the code itself. Whether or not it gets applied somewhere else, I don't know, and I won't speculate. But in this particular case, they wouldn't be over 300 units, from what we know from the original discussion about density
So
and
it's kind of
size of property.
anticipatory 300 in case it apply. Okay, got it. Thanks.
Councilmember Coffey.
Yes. How many stories is the existing building on Patriots Landing? Is that 4? I think he's sitting right back in the very back. Is that him back there? It's
3.
3 stories? What's the topography of that, the back parcel there, where they would?
It slopes downwards towards the golf course, so it's kind of, there's a hole back in that particular area.
Do you have any idea what the elevation is at McNeil versus back there?
I don't, off the top of my head, and I don't want to speculate. I know there's a fairly obvious decline in the property, but I don't want to guess at what that drop-off is specifically.
Well, if I recall from the presentations that I have seen by by carriage, it was supposed to basically kind of blend in, and it wouldn't be a full 5 stories. That would be basically a ground level, like what you would see from McNeil. It would be,
Right, I mean, they'll be taking advantage of the depression to put some of the facilities of the building underneath, in the lower portion of the property as a way to minimize the height of the building. I know when we looked at the memory care facility that they're going through the process as, right now, it's like right off of the loop road there. It drops a full story just before you even get to the, ground level, their first
Really?
floor, their main level, and that is pretty equal to the street level. But they've got a whole story underneath it.
and then this parcel over on the corner is lower than that.
It's probably at least as deep as that, as you go back towards that property line. But without pulling up the topography map, I don't want to give a specific regarding the depth of that.
Speaking of
The property owner may be able to.
Funny you should ask.
All you former military and pilots out there, with no terrain lines, that's going to be a fairly shallow drop. So that is the 200-foot line here. This is 200 feet again right here at Old Fort Lake. And that's what this area looks like, so. That is, what's that number? Can you read that? 200. Yeah, so it's a really shallow drop. It's all in the area 200 feet, all and around in there. Because the cursor's sitting on a 200-foot elevation, which is where that stuff's dropping back off into.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Mayor Corp. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, Councilmember Helder, to answer your question, as far as part of how far in front they could go, there's actually a 35 feet, or within 20 feet of the boundary, that there's a 35-foot limit in height. So they would actually have to go back further if they're going to create something this big. But Jeff, so the current standards, as currently written, from my understanding, is R5, and permitted uses multifamily residences when designated within an approved preliminary plat or short plat, and as a conditional use, senior housing and retirement homes with up to 120 units, correct?
Yes, I want to make sure I heard you correctly, but yes.
Yeah, so that's current. And then in the, also currently written within the land use code is multifamily projects shall not exceed 120 units, which basically matches that assisted living project within up to 120. And then projects with more than 80 units shall be separated from one another by at least 250 feet, regardless of the district in which the multifamily project is located. So refresh me on what they want as far as, they wanted 300 units in a, limited to 300 units in a single structure. So if they got 300 units, what's the buffer between another unit
that they could build another one of those 300 units?
Well, it goes to the cap of density entirely on the property. So when we look at the density count for the property, for the entire property that they have, they're not going to be able to achieve over a total number of 300 units.
So it's going to be, if they get this approved in the way that they want to do it, theoretically, it looks like there's just going to be one building.
Theoretically, it could be, yes. I don't want to speculate what their design is since we haven't seen anything, but theoretically, they could house all the, and again, remember, looking at the total density count, there are going to be unit counts that are going to be subtracted out based on the existing units that are on the property.
So I guess my question, well, I got a couple problems with this, and I've said it before, is that, you know, part of the comp plan talked about affordable senior living and things like this, but yet now they're talking about families with kids, and then they say, well, if they can afford it, because it's going to be expensive. They've said that. So that's not affordable to me necessarily. I don't like the idea of families being there. I do like the idea of senior living. So I'm just wondering if we kept it at the code that currently has a conditional use for senior housing and retirement homes with up to 120 units, and that they would have to be separated by at least 250 feet because it's more than 80 units, which is current code. Couldn't they just do that and meet their density requirements?
I don't know if they could, under the present count, be able to do that. Again, this was an applicant-driven proposal, so their proposal was what's taken forward. It wasn't, I mean, they generated the draft language. They submitted a very specific proposal throughout this process, so we're reacting to and responding to their requests in terms of what they proposed.
Okay, so I guess before I make a suggestion to the council, what is tracks? I drove by there today. So you've got a large first floor and then 2 stories above that. And what's the height of tracks? Do you know?
Yes, it is, 50 feet.
50.
So Trax actually has 4 stories, even though it looks like 3 from the outside, because the bottom apartments are studios and they're 2 stories. But they had it built to look like 3.
Okay.
It's 50 feet, just like the rest. ACU, Trax, your tall buildings downtown are all 50 feet.
Yeah, the 55-foot height limit.
And we're talking about 75 feet for the CCO. I guess my point to the rest of the council, I could make a motion later if necessary, but I would like you guys to think about making this not allowing multifamily, but allowing senior living at that 50-foot height that is currently at Trax.
Councilmember Gassick?
Again, just for clarification, there was a community meeting June of last year. 5 city officials were there and 8 homeowners, and I don't have a single email from a citizen in that area in my packet. Was there any emails from citizens in that area?
We may have had 1 or 2, but there were some generic questions that were asked about the process.
So it's already been through public hearing and planning commission, and this is the recommendation, right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
One thing I might add for council consideration is, and Jeff and excuse me, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Givens, jump in at any time. But you know, at different heights all around the city for different things. The downtown heights are a part of, one downtown planning. And while you certainly can, put heights where you want them, I would just remind the council, just like you said, Councilmember Corp, they've got a step-up requirement depending on their setback. They're next to the golf course. And I would leave Mr. Givens or Mr. Wilson to make this a little more clear. You know what I'm getting at, right? Mm-hmm. Please.
Okay. Good to speak.
And that's not our golf course, that's Eagles Pride.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification.
I mean, that's on the back, that's the back of JBLM, not sitting next to Fort Lake.
Okay, so there's a question about height. The underlying zone, which still stays in place, is 55 feet for multifamily. The applicant wrote in 75 feet as an option if they go through a conditional use and through their master plan process. So through that process, they're requesting to go up to 75, but it's not their right to get up to 75 feet. So through the master plan review process, that can be conditioned or not granted.
Councilmember Helder.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to follow up on that, the conditional use, what would be the approval authority for that?
It goes to, it processed to the hearing examiner.
I'm sorry?
It's processed to the hearing examiner.
Okay. So I actually, I agree with Councilmember Corp's idea. You know, I support the CCRC model that exists there, but that's not what this is. This is looking at plopping an apartment building in the middle of a residential neighborhood. These are downtown-sized multifamily housing buildings we're looking putting in the middle of two-story buildings. I would support an amendment to either lower the height, reduce the height, excuse me, or allow a development similar to what we have in either Clock Tower or the Yehle Park condos that fit very nicely into that neighborhood. I don't think that a 5, 4, or whatever, however many stories building is the right answer for that neighborhood. So.
Councilmember Corp.
So if they didn't go above 55 feet, then they wouldn't have to do a master plan? Or they just wouldn't have to get conditional use for that portion, for that building?
Well, as Mr. Gibbons said, for the conditional use permit process is part of the review process for the master plan to go above the 55-foot height limitation. There's still if they can still choose to do the master planning process to deal with the other components of the property as a whole. It's not just, I want to make sure you have that particular section.
Well, they have to go through conditional use permit for multifamily anyways.
Yeah, so the CU process for multifamily anyway.
But at what point would they not have to do a master plan?
I can answer.
Yeah, why don't you take a shot at it?
Sure. Really, they wrote this so they could get density bonuses up to 30% for only senior families. So I did the calculations for this site. They're allowed to have roughly 220 base units. Right now, that's what they have the right to. There's a potential to get up to 286. So that's 66 delta that can only be used for senior family or for senior housing. The other thing that why they propose this is if they wanted to introduce neighborhood-oriented uses, so commercial use, a coffee shop, a doctor's office, this is the mechanism to ask for that.
Well, I think that most of the people that I've talked to are okay with all that kind of stuff as long as it's walkable. And one of the other things I mentioned before too was that, you know, the parking. You know, if people are coming along McNeil and they that don't live in that Patriots Landing area and want to stop by this coffee shop or that donut shop or whatever it happened to be, and they can park on McNeil, that's fine. But I don't want to see a parking lot within that structure where people around Yehle Park Village can come and park. I'd rather see that they can walk there to get that, and that's the whole idea of these walkable communities. So that's another issue that I'm concerned about. I'm not sure whether in there they talked about having underground parking for that structure if they built one.
No, because we're getting into specifics about what their plan might look like, and they have not given us a plan for how they intend to develop the property. If they, you know, at this point, it's just pure speculation what they may or may not do. We would have to evaluate what they bring forward to make sure, A, there's adequate parking to serve the uses there. The whole intent in terms of introducing this and having this discussion through the process was to make it a walkable environment. It was intended to be able to attract the residents within the area to be able to walk to that if they wanted to go grab a cup of coffee or if there was some other sort of low-key service use that is there, but it's not meant to be a driving destination.
Okay, well, I'll just, you know, stand by what I previously said, that I'm just concerned with the fact that it's going to be, that it could be families, you know, versus senior living that I expect to see over in Patriots Landing, and that 75-foot limit for, even though it's conditional use, I guess at that point, that would be our assistance to make sure that where they're going to place it doesn't generate the negativity that we could possibly see by a 75-foot building too close to McNeil that sticks out like a sore thumb even above what they currently have across the street on Marshall Circle. So those are my concerns.
Okay, if there's no more discussion and no action is required to be taken, this will move to second reading at the next meeting.